Any questions from the morning session? Please feel free to. Questions from the morning session? That is not clear. Another minute and we will start. So when I talk of performance tools, or when you want to talk of performance tools, what's it that you would like to see? You can just message. There's something that you would like specifically like to be interested in, then I'll try and see whether I can work that in during the discussion. I guess I'm audible and you can see the slides.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Excellent. Tools to determine reliability of a system. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Let me see. Generally, we I don't think I'll be able to cover reliability here. So reliability, generally, we tend to see how is it continuing to work properly or not. So that there are different ways of doing it. There's some hardware techniques people use. I'm not going to be covering that. I don't think I'm an expert on that, and I don't think I will be able to cover that. Okay, there's another question coming in from Anmol. How does the performance vary with changes in variables associated with them? When you say variables, Anmol, could you kind of expand what is it that you really mean? Okay, okay. So from stress testing, okay. Okay, I can talk a little bit about this part, no problem. Number of CPU cores. Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, so you are saying parameters such as CPU cores, memory allocation. Yeah, good. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else has any other thoughts that you would want to see? With and without optimization. Yeah, good question. Optimization. And this come from compilers. And this of compiler optimization is a completely a complete subject by itself. Okay. Good, Anmol. Good set of questions. Karthik, I'll try and cover a little bit of this. Do performance tools also include monitoring tools? Yes, yes. When you say performance monitoring, yes, we are. So, okay, thank you. So I'll get started. So just to set a context of what we have seen, we saw that this is our timeline, and there's a certain period in the timeline when we are talking about pre-silicon. Okay? When the hardware is not there. The majority of the work in this area is done with a modeling tool like a simulator or an emulator. Right? Now, when it comes to doing the work after silicon is available, we have a bunch of other tools which are post-silicon. And these are the tools which we are actually studying the measurement and monitoring the hardware to actually get a measurement of how well the program is doing. So we start from a workload, and we need to analyze to see how this workload is doing on a particular piece of hardware. There are two approaches, or rather there are two reasons why you want to do this. One is you want to deeply characterize the workload. It's completely new, it's a new program, and you don't understand how this program behaves. So you want to kind of characterize the workload. So the tools that you will be using to characterize the workload are typically tools like profilers and system monitoring tools. Second set of tools are to study at the set of hardware. These are also tools, but these we will be using where we will be using hardware counters. Okay, and during characterization, we often also do stress testing. So how do we do that stress testing? I'll give you some feel for that. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to take a program and we want to find out from a optimization standpoint, the first question that we want to ask is, where is the time being spent? So if this is your program, you have a small main function, you have a call, add and a multiply, you have an add function and a multiply function. The first goal is to find out from a software perspective, where is time being spent? If you are trying to look for either optimization, or if you want to try and see which part of this program's behavior you need to study, you need to trace, you need to study, then you need to understand first where is the time being spent in this program. So the technique for doing that is called, the tool for doing that is called profiling. You profile the program to see where is time being spent in this. Okay, so at a very high level, there are two different techniques which are available for doing, this profiling. One called instrumentation and the other one called sampling. Can you quickly take a guess of what does an instrumentation technique mean and what does a sampling technique mean? Since it's a small group, just 17, 18, we should try and make it as interactive as possible.
We may require extra hardware to count time or hits or something like that.
Okay, extra hardware. Okay. So what does this extra hardware do? Could you your voice kind of broke up? I'm sorry. If you could say, I missed what you said.
It counts maybe hits or misses or.
Okay, hits or misses. Okay, that's fair. You get extra hardware that can count hits or misses or things at the. What else can you do? At a software layer, what can you do?
Bandwidth, clocks.
Okay. So you can, sorry, I couldn't, you said measure bandwidth?
Yeah, I mean, we can measure not exactly like bandwidth. No, I mean, we can measure bandwidth and clocks, right? Computation.
Yeah, but what will that help you? How will it help you? If you're measuring bandwidth, you're measuring the number of clocks. How is that helping you to find out which part of your program is spending more time?
Yeah, I mean, time, then we can just profile it by timing and uh, just we have some more time.
Okay,
We
so
can have.
okay, let me try and make my question a little more, elaborate a little more my question. So you want to run your program, right? Let's assume that this is your program under, this is your program, right? For some reason. Permanently taking everything. On this is going to be possible. So let's take. Let me, my machine is hanging. Okay. Okay. So we are taking this program, this add and multiply function, and I want to find out. So let's call this a dot out, and I want to find out how much time is being spent in different functions of a dot out, so that I can figure out either how to optimize it or to find out which are the parts of the program I must be using to as representative to study the performance on hardware, right? So how do I figure out the where the time is being spent in this program, given that I have an a dot out and I want to run this a dot out on my hardware? How will I find out? That's what I'm trying to get to. If you're given an input as an a dot out program and you want to find out where it's spending time in, so how will your tool figure out where it's spending time in?
It will
Because
check.
when you're running your program, you don't have any functions, right? You just have binary. This you don't have the notion of which name of the function is all lost. You only have binary addresses.
So it will check how many times it during runtime it is accessing memory for variables or data items. It
Yeah,
can
but how
check.
will it do the check? How can it do the check? That's my question.
So we have some mnemonics now. So in machine in binary codes we will have some kind of addresses. So if it is continuously accessing more times, then it depends on, it will check only those things only.
Okay.
Maybe.
So Okay, so here we use basically two different techniques. The first technique is what we call instrumentation. Okay. Okay, the first technique is instrumentation. So what you do is you tell the profiler, hey, I'm going to run this program. You can add additional code in this program to figure out which function is spending time on. Okay, so if you take this program add and you instrument it, you will add additional code to each function, which will log the entry and exit points, something like this. So what you see here is what you see here is for the add function, I've added a small print statement at the top, or it will add something saying that this function called one more time, just increments a counter. Every time the function is called, it will increment the counter. Every time this function is called, it increment the counter, and also keeps track of how much time it actually spends inside this function. How much time it spends inside this function and how much time it spends inside this function. So overall, after you finish executing this program, which is an instrumented version of the original program that you had, it can tell you how much time was spent in each one of the functions of your original code. Although there will be a little bit of, so do you foresee there being any problems with such a technique? What are the what do you see as foresee as challenges with such a technique?
The compiler may make changes so as to make it more optimized. So the original functionality may be lost, which we wanted to test.
Okay, but if you are assuming that the compiler is, so this, you take the code which the compiler, if this process of adding this additional code was done by the compiler after the optimization was done.
We
No,
are
I'm assuming
performing
that
instructions because of the prints.
Okay, the prints are just a placeholder. I mean, think maybe, yeah. So original functionality will be lost. Maybe I can manage that. But because of the prints, what additional thing do you get? Or maybe some additional code is there. So one of the challenges is that you're modifying the original program, right? So you're adding more code. So it's possible that the very act of observing the performance of a program, its behavior might slightly change. You're adding some overheads to each function yourself. If I assume that the overheads that I'm adding are still small and they are fixed, then all the functions will have that minimal overhead. So, but there will be still some overhead. The act of doing any instrumentation also adds some overhead to our measurement. Okay, is that part? Yeah, overhead due to instrumentation code. And yes, this code does take additional cycles. So that's one challenge. But overall, this is a reasonably preferred technique where you add the instrumentation, you kind of add some this and get the data out. So what kind of profilers exist? On your Linux systems, there are these standard profilers which are called prof and gprof. They identify at the time of compilation itself, you can say, you can give this is called -g, and you can compile your code with it. What this will do is it will identify the functions that takes your most time. Okay, so you can do this either at the function level. So the first one which I talked about, which is prof and gprof, will add this additional code at a function level. If you want more accuracy than that, if you want to say, no, I want to know within a function where exactly is time spent, not just the entire function itself, because the functions may be pretty large, then you need a tool which will go down a little more in detail, which looks at something called a basic block. Are you guys familiar with what a basic block is?
No, sir.
No. Okay.
Which will have only one statement.
So a basic block is a set of assembly instructions which has a single entry and a single exit. Okay, which means that either it ends in a branch, like in this case, this is a basic block, w equal to 0, and if x greater than z, this is a basic block, which is a set of or because there is no branch in the beginning, this could be a target of a branch. Like for example, here, y is equal to x and x plus plus is b2. At y, this is a target of a branch. If x greater than z, it comes here. If x less than z, it goes to b3. And this is also a target of a branch. Why do we break programs up into basic blocks? The reason we break it up into basic blocks is we are guaranteed that if the first instruction of the basic block executes, all the instructions of the basic block will execute. So rather than deal with all the instructions of the program, we can model the program's control flow in terms of a graph of basic blocks. And then all we need to do then is we need to insert in instrument in code only at the basic blocks. Typically compilers, in the compiling process, they will break a program up into basic blocks, and they will use this for doing their optimizations, compiler optimizations, right? So the code will be instrumented in each one of these basic blocks. So you will say this basic block entered once, increment the number of times each basic block gets entered. So this is better than instrumenting every instruction, but it's more intrusive compared to doing it at the function level. The only advantage is the more and more intrusive it gets, timing numbers become bad. You should not be looking at timing numbers, but you should be looking at counts. So the reason we want to do this is we want to get how many times this particular basic block got executed, not because how much time this basic block spent. That would be more difficult to get at a very high accuracy. Relatively, you can get amount of time spent in this compared to amount of time spent in this. That you can get. But you can't get very accurate results simply because the overhead that you are adding, the measurement overhead itself may be a few cycles. If the basic block size is small, then that's going to dominate the measurement part. So one of the key problems with performance monitoring or performance measurement is that the very act of measuring performance tends to perturb the system. The more accurate you want to get, more detailed you want to get, well, you cannot, you can get counts at more detailed level, but you cannot get timing at very detailed level. Timing will always be at a more granular level. Okay. Next question is, when do we instrument the code? We can instrument the code at compile time. Like for example, like this, at compile time, we can execute the code and then produces an instrumented version of the program. We execute this program, it will generate profile data at runtime. When the instrumented program is run, you can post-process this, it will dump data into a file. You can post-process this using tools where you can look at call graphs, which function called which function. All of these post-processing you can do to get information about which function is the heavy user. Alternatively, we can do one more thing, which is we can do this dynamically at runtime. Okay, at runtime, what we do is we examine basic blocks before they run, and we add instrumentation code to each basic block. translate this into a new address space. So what we do is we take the original basic block, we add instrumented code, and we put this into a trace cache. And this trace cache is what will be used for executing the next time. So if you see this basic block again, we don't need to add instrumentation again, but rather we will take it from a trace cache. Okay, and we will run it from here. This is the technique which is typically used by tools like DynamoRio or Valgrind. Okay, it's also the technique which is used by most of the virtual machines. So in your virtual machine, you're running you're running your code on a virtual machine. Pretty much the older technique to do this was something called binary translation. So you have to translate your original program which is running on the virtual machine to running on the hardware itself. So it used to use a technique called binary translation, and that also uses this very same technique of instrumenting dynamically. Okay, this is how the tools work.
Sir,
Yeah.
can you please explain that block diagram again?
Yes. Okay. So what happens is you will start running your program, right? Unfortunately, my pen is not working very well. Let me see if it still continues to work. No, this is the problem with it. So we start from the program. Your program has to be thought of as a sequence of basic blocks. So there's one basic block followed by the next basic block followed by the next basic block. This is in your original program. So when I submit your original program to this dynamic instrumentation profiler, what it will do is it will take the first basic block and say, hey, is this basic block something which I have seen before or not? Okay, have I seen this before or not? If I have seen this before, then what I'll do is I will just check whether it is there in the cache. Okay, so the cache contains information of whether this is a control flow instruction or a non-control flow instruction. Okay, so control flow instruction means it's a jump. Okay, so why do I need this? So the reason I need it is what I'll do is I'll first instrument that program, which means if I have 5 instructions in the basic block, I'm going to add a few instructions more to count the fact that this basic block has been seen before. Okay, so when I add that, which means all the addresses will have to be shifted. The branches will have to have a new branch target. Okay, you cannot have the original branch targets there. So every time there is a branch which is a control flow instruction, I'll have to look up to see what is the target in the instrumented instruction, instrumented basic block. So I will run it on the instrumented basic block. I'll figure out from here which is the instrumented, if it's a branch target, and I will run that that particular basic block from the cache along with the translated addresses. Is that? Did you get that?
Yes, sir. And when does context switching come in play here?
Okay, so if context switching comes in play, you will be out of so this is basically the same technique. Like I said, this is the same technique that is used in virtual machines also. So in virtual machines, context switching comes in play, where you may actually have 2 different applications which get context switch, in which case I'll have to build the basic block cache afresh for the new new application, for the new process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I cannot do it. So there are two different processes which are running. So the technique is the same. It's just that while instrumenting, I do it for profiling. I do it, which is a much simpler technique. Whereas for virtual machines, I have this more complex technique which is there. Fair?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, the caveats for doing instrumentation based, this first is that this code bloat. Because I'm adding instructions to every basic block or every function, it's really going to add more code to it. And this is executed dynamically. So this is not very good for measuring things like hardware usage, like for example, cache misses. If you're going to add more code, you're obviously increasing the size of the code. So number of instructions to be executed increases, and hence the number of cache misses also may change. So this is not a very good technique. This kind of instrumentation-based profilers are not very good to measure things at hardware level or timing. Okay, it also has dynamic instrumentation, also has very heavy overheads during runtime, but it can be very good for generating instruction and data traces. It may not be particularly good for actually measuring performance at a very detailed level. This can be very useful for input to simulators. The next type of profilers that we see are those that interrupt the program at regular intervals. We don't want to add the hardware differences. When we interrupt the program at regular intervals, we will examine to see what the call stack is. Right? When an interrupt comes in, you know that the instruction which is currently under execution is pushed onto the stack. So if I examine the call stack, if I examine that stack, I know which function is currently being executed by the program, or at least what is the range of address that is currently there, and that I can map to the function which is being executed. So I can use this technique to roughly estimate how much time is spent in the program. If I can control this, frequency at which I sample. So I sample this at a regular interval, see what PC's value is. Based on the PC value, I go back and see what function is there at that PC value. And I use that to estimate how many samples fell in a particular function. And I use that to say how much time was actually spent in that particular function. Okay, this is a very simple technique which is there, and what this does is it piggybacks on the operating system's timer interrupt. You know that every computer has this timer, right? Your notion of the time which it has. It has to keep updating time. So there is an interrupt which comes in roughly every millisecond or even less. That is an interrupt to the processor, to the operating system, to say, please update your notion of time, right? Increment time. So what the sampling based profiler does is it piggybacks on this timer interrupt. In this case, if the timer interrupt came in when I was executing program function A, this shaded function, the second one came in when you're again in function A. So you could be getting some when the blank function is executed, some when the shaded function is executed. Then at the end of it, you create a histogram of how much time was spent in each one of the functions. It's a very quick and reasonably accurate way of figuring out which function executes for how long. So you estimate the number of samples, see what's the this interval, and attribute that interval to the entire function. It doesn't go into further details. It's just from that perspective, it's less accurate because it's attributing the entire time to this of the sample to this one function, when in reality this function may have been really short-lived. Okay, that's one challenge of the sampling-based profiler, but the advantage is it's really fast. The sampling frequency will affect accuracy. The more you the smaller that you make the sample in the frequency, the faster that you sample, you will get more accurate, but you're adding more overhead. The longer that you sample, then you will lose the short-lived functions. Overall, this is a great technique for estimating overall breakup of time. It's less intrusive, and if you're looking for detailed breakup, this is not, or causes of latency, this is not the technique to use. Sampling-based profilers are great for quickly estimating the amount of time that it takes in different functions. Any questions to this point? Okay, we'll quickly do a little bit of this operating system and where the operating system tends to affect a program. Now, in the last session, the morning session on power, we learned that most architecture is moving the direction of multi-core. We're having more and more cores simply because that cuts the wire length and hence cuts the amount of power that we lose. So for a given power, we get much better performance rather than waste performance. So we have this multi-core architecture with shared memory, sometimes shared cache. So you have these resources which are shared. On top of this, the OS tends to manage the mapping between the application's threads to these cores and also to managing the memory, right? So which means that this particular thread could be scheduled on this core for some time, and afterwards it context switches, it moves to this core, it context switches, it moves to this core. However, each one of these cores has memories associated with it. It could have, this could have a separate memory, this could have a separate memory, I mean, in terms of cache. So all the context that you built in the cache is now lost because your thread migrated to a different core. Okay. Second thing is possible that in this core itself, you could be having multiple, you're sharing some L3 across multiple cores. Sometimes this is very common that L3 is shared across multiple cores. So you could have one L3 shared by these two cores, another L3 shared by these two cores. In which case, two threads which are running on these two cores require to contest for the L3, right? So in which you will get to have some conflict and you would actually be interfering with another person's thread or another process's thread. Okay, so this is where the OS kind of tends to affect the performance. Next question that you want to also know is, at some point, I think one of you had asked this question, saying that how do we kind of know whether our applications, as it does, what happens when we change the number of cores? Now, if you have a single-threaded application which you are trying to run on a multi-core machine, you're not going to see any performance improvement. Or anything, you might see some performance degradation because your thread is moving around different processor cores. So in our lab today, we will see how to look at which thread is executing on which core, and then see how many cores are there on the machine, what's the frequency of each core. All of this we will look at in the lab, how to monitor that. Now, if you're having a multi-threaded program, the question is how well, if I give more cores to it, will the performance increase or will it decrease or will it be good? Can you think of any reasons why a performance should go down when you have multi-threaded programs and you have multiple cores?
Sir, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So question is, if I have a multi-threaded program, right, and I have, let's assume I have 10 threads, multi-threaded program, and I run it on a 4-core machine, I get some performance. I run it on an 8-core machine. and I do not see that the performance doubling. Right? Can you give me? I'll be more specific. So can you suggest some reason why the performance does not double when I increase the number of cores, even though there are more threads?
Sir, it is because though they will be doing,
Those
Let's go one by one. So yes.
though they will be doing in
those
parallel,
threads are
but
not.
but
Those threads are not software. I mean, those are not hardware. They are just software.
Sorry,
Just,
I'm losing your voice. It's not very clear. So though.
sir, those are not software threads. I mean, those are not actual hardware threads. They are just software manipulation through context switching.
Yeah, that's fine, but they have got hardware resources where they will be running, right? Let's take this example. Let's take this example. Let me say that, I have 4 threads here, right? And let me cut these two. Let me run my 4 threads on these 2 cores only. This one and this one. Let me run it on these 2 only. Right? I run it and number these cores 1. Now it seems to magically work. So I'm running these 4 threads. T1, T2, T3, T4 on 2 cores, 1 and 3. That's my first scenario, is run on 2 cores. My second scenario is run on all 4 cores. Right? So let's assume this takes X seconds. How much time will you expect this to take? You should expect it to take X by 2 because you're throwing 2 more resources at it.
Sir, there may be data in the shared memory. So, out of which there may be no improvement.
Okay, so what you're saying is there may be data which is shared. Okay. So what does sharing of data do? How does it impact performance?
Sir, it
How
should
does
depend
need
on
to,
whether these threads are independent or dependent. If one
correct?
thread is depending on the output of the another one.
Okay. Independent or dependent threads. Okay. So that is one. Okay. So you said something. I'm sorry you got cut. I'm not keeping track of names, so I don't know who spoke. Somebody else mentioned lot of synchronization between them. So that's something data shared. Somebody mentioned synchronization. Time taken for context switch, shared course contains flushed on context switch. Okay, yeah. So that could be another reason. And application is not written in a way that data dependency. Okay. Okay, all good points. Okay. Time taken for context. There are overheads later allocating the instructions. Can you tell Amdahl's law? Yes. We are back to using Amdahl's law. Yes. So it's possible that we have 4 cores. We have 4 cores. We are not able to take benefit of the cores simply because that there's some synchronization between them. We are accessing shared memory or shared. There's a lock. There's synchronization which needs to happen between these threads, which is why we are not getting the benefit of going up. What's also possible is that these threads are, in this case, restricted because they have only access to, even though they may only be, there may be only 2, even though they have 4 threads, it may be just that these 2 threads are active, and these 2 threads depend on these threads to finish. So you're just acting, even though you have resources, you don't really cannot get benefit from it. So what is also important is what's the structure of the application. How do you model the structure of the application, and hence the memory management here and all of that, which leads to the managing of the threads and moving across. Okay, so this is the question. As a thread executes on a core, it builds up some context in cache. It builds up some context in memory because pages have to be brought into memory. When you do a context switch, the thread migrates to a different core. This context is lost, and memory context becomes important, especially if you are having NUMA machines. Are you guys aware of what is a NUMA machine?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, I'll just quickly take you through that. Okay, so suppose you have a 4-core machine. Let's assume 2 cores. This is core 1, this is core 2, right? And you have some memory, right? So how do you kind of connect these together? You connect them like this. You have a bus, and this is memory, and you connect them on the bus. So in this case, the cores are equidistant from memory, roughly. You can think of it this way. If you can put the, they are. Oh, one second. Okay, the cores are equidistant from memory in this case. So if the cores are equidistant from memory, the latency that it takes to access any row of data from this core to this memory is fixed. Both of these. So if this latency is L, this is also L. It's the same time that it takes to access any row in this memory by either one of the cores is the same. This is called a uniform memory architecture. Right? Now, as we increase the number of cores and to memory, it's not possible to rely on this bus alone. You will not be able to add and ensure that you get, data from this memory. So you probably need some kind of an interconnection network here. That's one problem. Second problem is that if you design it this way, that if you add all of these to the same connection, at some point of time you are not going to be able to access all of the memory. So a technique which is often used is this die size will become extremely large. So instead of that, what is done is you make it smaller. You have some cores in this, and they have access to some memory. You have some more cores in this, maybe 2 cores here, 2 cores here, and this have access to its own memory. You also have an interconnection network which allows you to access this memory, and you have one which accesses the local memory. So this is local, this is remote. This is local for these cores, this is remote for these cores. The local memory, so this is local, is fast access. Remote is slower. Right? So your processors which are NUMA processors, they have the challenge that as long as you keep your main memory, which is local, if your thread is here and it's having a cache miss, it's brought from memory. If it's brought from this memory, it's slower. If it's brought from this memory, this is faster. If it's getting from this memory, it's much slower. Right? Now, if this same thread moves from here to here, then what happens is all the context that it has built up in this L3 cache is lost. Okay, and in this case, the operating system may have decided that because the thread is executing here, I should load all the data of this thread in this memory. But now that the thread has got moved to a different core, which is much far away from this memory, all of the data accesses are going to become much slower. So that's how, the operating system or the architecture of the processor also plays a role in performance. Because it's important for the operating system to understand what is the underlying architecture and take advantage of it while it's doing scheduling. Now, how can you take a look at which thread is executing on your system? We will use a tool called HTOP. Okay, the tool will tell you exactly which thread is executing on which core. There's another way to do it, which is to use what is called the proc file system. The proc file system is a way of peeking into the data structures of the OS. So we will use the proc file system, which is a virtual file system, which gives access to the kernel data structures. We can figure out things like what is the current virtual memory mapping, which are the files which are open, how much, or we can use the tool called SAR, which will allow us to measure the amount of paging activity that is happening on the process and stuff like that. So the idea of what I was trying to present here is the fact that there's more to your application's performance than just your application running directly on hardware. The operating system does play a very significant role in the performance of your application. So it's important for you to be able to measure some of these when you're running an application on a particular system. Okay. Any questions on this? We will be looking at all of this in our lab session in the afternoon. Any questions? Okay. Data dependency, what is NUMA? Memory access. So with this, we come to the section where we looked at operating system activity. The last section that we have now is we are going to be looking at measuring microarchitectural activity. How do we measure microarchitectural activity? No. Very often as computer architects, we need to really understand how many L1 cache misses are there, I cache misses, how many L1 D cache misses are there, how many TLB misses are there. And we need to have accurate information about such events. So how can we go about getting such accurate information? We can do that by actually keeping track of hardware counters. Okay, the Pentium processor onwards, way back, you can refer to this old article, maintains a set of counters. All processors, whether they are AMD or ARM or Intel, whichever one, internally keeps track of a lot of counters. Right? Every time something happens, for example, an instruction is decoded, increment a counter. A prefetch is made, increment a counter. Data is dirty in the cache, needs to be written back, increment a counter. So there are a whole bunch of counters inside the processor which are constantly incremented by at runtime. All of these, the way to access these is using what are called model specific registers. There are these two instructions called read MSR and write MSR, which allows you to say, I want to measure this particular hardware. Can you read the current value of it? What all you can model, what all you can measure depends on the model of the processor. For example, on some of your laptops, you may not be able to measure things like L3 cache misses and things like that. But on a server, we will be able to easily measure that. So depending on the type of machine that you have, you can measure these hardware counters. Some of the tools that you can use is there's Intel specific tool called VTune, which will work on Intel machines. There's an AMD specific tool called NuPerf, which will work on an AMD specific machine. And then there's Perf. There's a general tool which is available on all Linux machines, which is what we will show you today, which is called Perf, which we can use, which will automatically figure out which is the model that you have and read those model specific registers and tell you, hey, this is how you're using the hardware. Okay, so that's how you measure things. Now, of course, you need to be very, very careful when you are measuring hardware related events. The reason is when you're measuring hardware related events, you should not have any perturbation coming in from other applications or other things that are happening on the system, because those can tend to change your measurements very, very significantly. Now, things like this where it's useful for. Threads from two different cores can be sharing in L3, can interfere with each other, can remove the cache lines required by the other. You can use perf to find out how many L2 misses, L3 misses will be having per core. You can get this information to figure out whether two threads are actually interfering with each other. Okay, or if you so this kind of level of detail can only be done if you're using performance counters. Any questions regarding this? Okay. No questions, then I'll move forward. We're almost at the end of the session. So, given that most processors will perform out of order execution, you will also find that there will be many instructions which are in different stages of execution. If you really just get overall statistics, they may not be able to tell you, this is the reason why something is happening. This is happening because of this instruction. You may not be able to get that level of detail. So one way to solve this is to use something called instruction-based sampling. What instruction-based sampling is, it says, okay, let me take this one. I'm not going to measure all stats. I'm just going to sample one instruction in, let's say, 100,000, or one instruction in a million or something like that. And I will collect all stats about this instruction in the fetch, execution, how many times, for example, how many times you did a speculative fetch for an instruction and that was killed later. Okay, so these kind of data, if you kind of generate on a per instruction basis sampling, allows you to get a better feel for how the pipeline can be designed. Okay, so it's a very interesting tool called IBS, which is from AMD, which is called instruction-based sampling. It's open source. You can go and try that out. So we do not going to talk about this. Okay, there are a couple of questions. Do we also get to know the type of instructions like I type or R type? What is I type, R type? What do you mean by I and R, Anmol? Ah. Mm. You can get some information like this. You can get some amount of information, but not. See, some of the perf tool will only give you general statistics. If you want something which is specific, maybe Intel or AMD gives you more detailed stats. So those will have to be picked from either VTune or AMD's MuPerf. So you should be able to get that information. Then your other question that I saw was question, would each core, okay, some other questions which I have seemed to have missed. How do we know the start and end? How do we decide buffer size to hold these instructions? This is our part. Improve simulators. Do hardware counters reset on context switch? No, hardware counters, for most part, don't really, because then you'll have to accumulate across different. So that's a very difficult thing to do. You know, hardware counters don't really get. Just think about it. How does the hardware know a context switch has occurred? I mean, it does know. But how do you think you can figure out that the hardware that a context switch has occurred? And then it has to keep track of which is that process for which these counters are to be loaded. Now, if you reset it, then some application program has to keep track of the counters across context switches. How does the OS signal to that application program that it needs to accumulate this information? So that's not possible. So it just keeps track of it entirely. Abhishek, do we check the completed instructions or are incomplete instructions counted too? Yeah, it will keep track. It will keep track of how many are there in the reorder buffer at any time. But my guess is, do we check the completed instructions or the incomplete instructions also part of the hardware measurement? Is that your question, Abhishek? Okay, if the counter has been incremented, then the counter gets incremented when a particular operation occurs. For example, a prefetch has occurred. At that point, the instruction has not committed, but the counter has got incremented. You cannot increment the counter for prefetching after the commit has occurred. That would be quite challenging. So, and overall, it doesn't matter, because when we are doing this, we are probably measuring for millions of instructions, and the number of the reorder buffer are going to be, few orders of magnitude below. So it's not going to impact the measurement that much. Yeah, Abhishek, does that clarify? Abhishek and Anmol, questions? Any other questions? So to conclude, performance is actually one of the most important parts of the whole process, architecture process. And there are various tools that we need to know, and there's also the challenge that mostly a performance engineer needs to be well versed with different aspects of the system, starting directly from the nuts and bolts in terms of what the architecture is at the microarchitecture level, sometimes even at the RTL level. And needs to understand software stack like compilers, OS, and then the application itself. So it's big challenge. The performance engineer is pretty much the guy who knows almost anything about a system. So it's a most exciting field. It's one of the most interesting fields after having been in performance for almost greater part of 2 decades. It's like Sherlock Holmes going after debugging to find out where problems are and solutions to how to improve performance. So wonderful field. I mean, we will talk again in the lab. If there are no further questions, if there are any further questions, please do message me. There's still 5 minutes. We can I can take a couple of questions. Otherwise, the remainder questions we can do in the lab. Is there any question that I haven't answered? I may have missed. I think the stress tool that you mentioned, there are tools. For example, there's a tool called Stress NG, which allows you to add. You want to figure out how if I stress the memory somehow. So I will add some programs which occupy some part of the memory and then run my process to see how much my program will perform when the memory is stressed. So can you give one instance of debugging performance problem methodically at work? How was it dealt with? I can refer to you to a paper. One of my when I was consulting with AMD, one of our interns, he debugged through this application called Death Star Bench, which is a microservices based application. You can look this up as the paper, but in general we start with the simplest things, which is we start with running the program on the hardware, changing things like we first fix the frequency. One of the problems that we do see is if the frequency keeps varying, it's very difficult to figure out, compare 2 runs because it might vary at different points. Is first you fix the frequency, which you can do through the BIOS. You fix the frequency, you run the program and try and load the program, run it with different number of cores, see whether it scales, upfront. Does it have the scaling is linear? Is it sublinear? How bad is it? Then we start debugging. We use these various tools, like for example, we use to find out perf to find out which parts of the program is it spending more time on. Is it spending more time in user space? Is it spending more time in kernel space? Then once we figure that out, then we figure out next at the hardware level, where are we spending time? Are we spending more time in doing some lock instructions? Are we spending more time in doing some load of the memory? Is the front end more bottleneck? Which means, are you not getting, is the instructions, are there so many instructions data that you're pretty much busy fetching them into memory? Is that what the problem is? Or it's bottleneck because it's got so many complex instructions that it's taking time to execute those. So that's how we kind of debug performance and see where we can do some stuff in hardware to improve. You can look at this paper. I will probably share the link with you. It's a couple of years old with some of which we did together. That might be useful for you to read. Next, any other questions on this? Okay. So if there's nothing else, then I will stop. You want to unmute and ask, you can ask anything. Otherwise, we'll meet in the lab. What time is the lab? 2:30, is it?
Yeah, the lab is at 2:30, sir.
Okay. So my TAs will be handling that session. I'll be available, but mostly they will be running the session. I probably have another meeting at that time, so I'll be switching.
Sure, sir, sure.
Okay. Happy to do this. So we will meet again next week. And next week, I'm going to talk about why computer architecture, it's such an interesting time to be in computer architecture because of all the changes that are happening in, with cloud computing and with big data and with so many other things that are happening. And how do computer architects have to respond to that? So that will be maybe a talk next week. So till then, I hope you enjoyed this session as much as I did.
Yes, sir. We like to thank Subramanian sir for a wonderful session. So looking forward for the lab sessions. So I would request you all to join for the lab session at 2:30. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vinay sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be stopping the recording now.